You have problems. I have problems. But every single human on this planet Earth has one problem in common, at least one, and that's the debt problem. This number right here is the total amount of debt in USD considering everything from your credit card payments to your housing and mortgage costs, car payments for your old reliable Honda, debt from all governments, debt from all countries. This is the number we're looking at. $318 trillion, a number so unfathomably large, it begs the question, actually a lot of questions. How bad is it? Does it even matter? And what are the consequences? Because in general, when we hear the term debt, we think negative, right? Debt is bad. You want to buy a fancy new car? Well, too bad. You got some big fat student loan repayments coming. But we got to talk about one thing. Is debt actually bad? In general, the consumer thinks so. Well, that's interesting because if we look at this chart here, a chart showing us the total amount of debt on average a person is in a given country, the closer to the middle and the larger the country, the more debt per person. There's something a little funky going on here. We think debt is bad. Well, notice this. The countries closest to the middle, in other words, the countries with the highest amount of debt per person, largely correlate with the countries with the best quality of life. We can see Netherlands, Austria, United States, Germany, Japan, all centered in this tight circle in the middle here. And as we move to the outside of the circle, the countries with the least amount of debt per person, we have some of the countries with the lowest quality of life rankings. For the most part, underdeveloped nations. Senegal, Cambodia, Zimbabwe, South Sudan. So what's going on here? Countries that are objectively more developed, more successful, safer to live in, more educated, are more in debt than their counterparts. Yet we talked about the perception from the consumer's point of view, you and I, debt is bad. As individuals, we don't like debt. It holds us back from making purchases that we want to make. Yet some of the objectively best countries in the world have the most debt per person. So to understand why there's such a stark difference in the perception from the individual point of view, you and I, as opposed to the government and from a country's perspective, we got to look at the best and worst case scenarios when you and I have a lot of debt versus when a government, a whole nation, has a lot of debt. This right here is our buddy Jim. Our friend Jim has done quite well for himself. He's made a lot of money over the past few years, but times have gotten a little harder. Business has slowed down, and unfortunately for our good friend Jim, his business went under. And the regression in Jim's financial situation starts out pretty slow. He starts making some later credit card payments, which results in a fat interest rate to be paid. And eventually he defaults on his credit card payment, which in turn takes his credit score, let's call CS, down. When your credit score goes down, say goodbye to that nice new sports car you wanted to get. Say goodbye to any affordable loan you could get on a house. Jim is in quite the pickle. Failing to pay on time results in big problems. Hence why experts say get out of debt, and people like you and I generally have a negative perception. So Jim's story didn't turn out too well, but what happens to the government when they buy all these fancy, expensive, and shiny things but can't pay for them? Well, this is how the government pays for all its shiny things. The government, we'll use the US government in this case, makes a lot of money each year. That's the revenue. However, the amount that they spend is much greater than the amount that they make. They don't have enough money to spend on the things that they want to purchase and spend on. And so what does the US government do? Well, they issue bonds. Now, bonds are great, right? You and I can purchase these bonds for $1,000, let's say, and in return get paid 2.5% of that $1,000, that principal, each year. We're collecting essentially free money. You and I can buy these bonds. Foreign governments, foreign countries can also buy these bonds. Now, the US government can use that principal money that you are letting them borrow to pay for that spending, those purchases that they can't afford at this moment. And these bonds do have a maturity date, the date where that $1,000 is returned back to you. So let's say 2030, back to you, back to the government. But the US government, if they continue to spend more money and continue needing more money to fund whatever projects that they want to, they're going to have to keep pushing this back. They can just issue new bonds with a maturity date of 2040. Now, this works until it doesn't, right? At the end of the day, if the US government can pay the money back that they owe to countries, to people, then this is okay. But remember, they don't have excess money to spend. So the money that they rely on is the debt that they're selling to you. If you stop buying their bonds, if countries stop buying the bonds, then the US no longer has the money, has the capital to pay you back, to pay the countries back that they owe. The government can raise as much debt as it wants, as long as there's people and governments willing to buy it. And like you, remember, you have a credit score. So if you don't pay back your debt on time, your credit score is going to go down. And likewise, with the government, they have these credit ratings that are intended to represent how reliable, how trustworthy these countries are in paying back their debt. Now we can see clearly down here the United States is basically the highest credit rating there is. Yet, if they were forced to pay back their debt tomorrow, there would be no chance and an instantaneous collapse of the entire financial system. So clearly, this doesn't really mean much. We can pretty much just throw this out the window. Oh, and another big problem of this that might remind you, some may say a Ponzi scheme, some may say a pyramid scheme. The US relies on selling more bonds to you to cover payments and debts that are due right now. That means the more that they continue to issue this debt, the more people they continue to owe money to, the more governments, the bigger and bigger their interest payment gets. Remember, that bond pays out a set amount of interest, and as more and more bonds are issued out, the interest that the US must pay out to the people who purchase these bonds and are lending the money continues to take more and more of the spending. Interest is literally a bigger share of US spending than national defense and Medicare right now. Let that sink in. So again, as the US continues to issue debt, this number continues to grow. And remember, the US is using the principal, the $1,000 that you or a government gives it, to make interest payments to you. It's literally just a debt circle, right? If nobody buys these, then they don't have money to pay out the interest rate. This is an oversimplification, but basically let's compare it to your personal Lambo dream collection. You want to start with your first Lambo purchase, and so you take out a loan to buy that Lamborghini for $250,000. Now, even if you make good money, let's say you make 150 grand a year. This is a very, very expensive car to buy, especially at that income level. And so that 1 mil Lambo that you've been eyeing, that fully decked out, detailed Lambo for $3 million that you want to buy. Now, obviously at this level, the bank is going to say, dude, what are you talking about? No way in hell we're going to give you any of this money to buy this fat Lamborghini if you can barely afford the 250 grand one that you purchased earlier. And this one, they'd laugh in your face. The point is, the banks would limit you. It's obvious. Why would they ever take a shot at loaning you out that money? They know a default is pretty much 100% guaranteed. Well, for the US government, there is no limit. In fact, the US government controls the limit. It's like the bank loaning money to the bank itself to make any of the purchases that it must make or want to make. As we can see, the US debt is exponentially increasing. We all know that. We understand that. But when this imaginary and pretty arbitrary debt ceiling is being approached by this debt, they just raise the number. And today we're sitting at a debt ceiling of roughly $36.1 trillion. And next thing you would ask, if you and I take out a loan, we're trying to get that Lambo that we've always wanted, there's got to be some number that the bank's looking at. Like, hey, there's no shot in hell we're giving you this $250,000 loan because you make X amount of money. What's the sign for the US government to stop taking on more debt? Hey, you can't afford this Lambo, we can't give you this money. Hey, we're approaching the debt ceiling, we probably shouldn't print more money. Again, an oversimplification, but basically the only penalty is we're gonna downgrade your credit rating, which, as we talked about, doesn't really have any meaning because everybody and their mother knows that the US government would not be able to pay its debt if it were due tomorrow. And so you can imagine with this infinite money glitch, if you want to just keep funding projects, keep pouring billions and billions into infrastructure, into foreign investment, into domestic investment, why not just raise the debt ceiling every time the debt starts to approach it? After all, it's pretty arbitrary, and there's essentially no penalty for it. Again, there are things we aren't talking about here. This is an oversimplification, but I think it does it justice. The debt ceiling has been raised something like 73 separate times, and clearly at this rate, it's going to need another raise, probably sooner rather than later. Now, we talked about what happens to Jim when he can't make his payments on time, when he defaults on his debt. What happens to a country, a government? Well, let's look at the land of ice and fire, Iceland. Iceland, during the Great Financial Crisis in 2008, underwent one of the worst financial crises relative to its size in modern history. 3 of its major banks defaulted on foreign debt, and you can see their stock market dropped essentially from 4,250, let's say, to 250. I mean, we're talking about basically a 90% drop. Now, you can imagine how devastating that is to working individuals on the verge of retirement, about to start taking distributions from their 401k. Inflation absolutely skyrocketed. Again, you could imagine how detrimental that is to the consumer, trying to buy groceries, trying to buy gas, trying to live life when the prices of items that they're buying are going up on average 12 to 13% per year. The unemployment rate absolutely skyrocketed. So to bring it full circle, when a country, an entire nation defaults on its debt, for ordinary people, for citizens like you and I, there will be higher food costs and costs in general due to inflation. Businesses all over the place will start cutting jobs because they need to save money, and the government needs to start cutting costs. Healthcare, social services will probably go away, at least temporarily, because that government needs to pay the money that they owe, and fast. But again, this was just in Iceland. Imagine if this were to happen in the United States, a country that owns the currency, the US dollar, that makes up the reserve currency for more than half of the entire world. A country whose stock market literally makes up almost 70% of the total global stock market and owns 40% of the global debt market. Those US Treasury bills, those bonds we talked about earlier. So you can imagine if the US defaults on its debt and isn't able to pay back what it owes, all these countries get absolutely hosed. The US gets hosed. If the US gets hosed, everybody fails. So countries, governments, people, you and I, the entire financial system would epically fail. It doesn't matter how many years they've had. Grand Theft Auto 6 would fail too. So in conclusion, does debt matter? Well, to you and I, obviously, yes. We need to make payments on time or else we're not going to be able to get loans to get a house, get a car. And that would be problematic. For governments, not so much, especially the United States. It literally does not matter how much debt they take on unless you and I, other governments, aren't willing to buy that debt. Again, it just works until it doesn't. It's a big circle. This circle will go on forever until nobody's buying bonds, treasury bills, and other forms of debt that the US issues. Now, the part that will probably come sooner than later is this issue with interest costs surpassing other major spending categories. I mean, at this point, we're just using debt money to pay for more debt, which again is legit the definition of a pyramid, a Ponzi, a house of cards. It works as long as you can continue to find more people to buy the debt that you're putting out. Now, I hope this gave you some good insight. The whole concept of debt was always something that is just confusing because at this point it's infinite, right? It doesn't matter how much is printed. It doesn't matter how often it's printed. Obviously, there's consequences, both short and long term, but it's going to continue to be this way for probably until the financial system collapses because of this design. So I want to hear what you think. Clearly, the deficit, the amount of money that the US is making, minus the amount of money that they're spending, is only going one way, and that's more spending. How much longer will this trend continue? Will this last forever? Is there a solution that works and doesn't cripple the entire world economy? If you support or feel for Jim in any way, please consider subscribing. All right, that's it for me. I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.